Tate Chronicles now transmitting.
Welcome to the Tate Chronicles on Healthcare Now Radio. And now, here's your host, Jim Tate.
Good day, citizens of the free world, from border to border, coast to coast, and to all the ships at sea. I bring you a warm welcome. This is your correspondent, Jim Tate, and thank you for tuning into the Tate Chronicles. Join me as we cut through the fog that exists at the leading edge of healthcare technology. Our mission is simple. We're searching for beneficial disruption in healthcare from emerging technologies and workflows. My guest today is Gus Malezis. Gus is the President and Chief Executive Officer at Imprivata and is a leader in the information technology security industry. Gus, welcome to the Tate Chronicles, and thanks for sharing your time with us.
Jim, great to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm really fascinated by healthcare technology, and especially this hump we're trying to get over of interoperability. And since interoperability requires trust of identity and healthcare security, because we have to have that trusted connection between people, technologies, and information, I know your company is really involved in creating trusted digital identities, clinicians, patients, and medical devices. And so first, just for a little background, Gus, can you tell me how you first got involved in all this? What was your interest? What was your lead in?
Yeah, my interest in healthcare really stems from my tenure in technology, and I'm a software engineer by training. That's kind of what I studied way back when, and I always loved technology, but the connection of technology to me has always been of how it makes our lives better. How can technology help us in our professional life? How can it help us in our personal lives? And as I went through the years, I noticed that technology would do that, but it would also add a tax, a user tax, an education tax, a knowledge tax, call it whatever you will. But in order to make good use of technology, you just had to learn a lot more about it. And maybe more than, some of us, myself included, felt you needed to know. So, here it is. It makes your life easier, but you just really got to dive in and learn how to use it. And that sort of disrupts things for certain people. In healthcare, this is particularly acute. This is particularly significant in that in healthcare, doctors and nurses want to focus on the patient. That really is why they're there, why they're all there, and that's what they commit to. And yet technology, as it comes in to help them with this process, quite often does more than just help. Quite often it disrupts the way they work. It changes things in a way that, frankly, they don't understand or they don't agree with. And it makes things more complicated for them. So, as you know, doctors and nurses are, very smart, highly trained, very capable bunch. They step back and say, wait a minute, that's not really helping me. Technology here is getting in the way. Give me technology that helps me get to the right direction, helps deliver better value and a better patient experience. And that's really why I'm here. I'm here because technology can do that. In healthcare, it hasn't done a incredibly terrific job of that. It's been better in some areas than others, but we think we can do a lot better with technology in delivering healthcare.
Great. I appreciate that. One thing that occurs from time to time, I've noticed in healthcare technology and security, is certain buzzwords come into our environment. Everybody uses them, but everybody doesn't necessarily understand them. So let me give you one of those buzzwords, Gus, and let's see what you have to think about it. Really, and that is, what is identity management? I know it's more than just having a user ID and a password. How do you define identity management?
Yeah, identity management is an element, is a piece of a bigger category, a bigger box, if you will, of digital identity. And digital identity, as you know, is what describes you, what defines you in the digital world, whether it's a personal digital world or healthcare digital world. Who are you? What's the level of trust and confidence of that digital identity? And identity management comes right on the heels of that. Identity management, once you have a good identity, once you have a high trust identity, then it is all about identity management. How do you use a digital identity? Where do you allow the individual to go. What systems can they access? How do they access them? What are they not enabled to access and why? And then, of course, you want to track all of that. So the small piece is having a digital identity. It's important that it's a trusted digital identity. But on the heels of that, a much bigger process and technology space is that identity management. How do you manage all of this identity so that you know the right person is accessing the right stuff, delivering the right care, using the right equipment? And then, of course, in healthcare, you have a lot of regulatory requirements, not to mention the cybersecurity requirements. Identity management is directly involved in the compliance and the cybersecurity of those digital identities as well.
And the whole issue of identity management, let's talk about it a little bit. I'm fascinated by maybe some real-world applications. And so I'm a patient. I can log into my portal with a user, one of many portals, with the specific user ID and password. Is there some way that I can have whether it's a token or I'm not sure how it actually works. So I only have, my identity is known and trusted no matter what healthcare entity I'm interacting with.
Yes, that's a terrific example. In fact, it's a terrific application for a trusted digital identity, and then everything that comes with that, which is the management of that identity. And just to start with that, Jim, you just described an exemplary application and a very efficient, potentially very efficient application of how a patient can interact with the healthcare system. In this country, in the U.S., the first observation comes in that there is no common digital identity of a patient across healthcare providers, across the country, across different states, across different institutions. So what happens in that portal, and I'll get to the token piece as well. That's a relatively, I would say, a relatively secondary element, important. But what's key here is if you are a patient and you want to understand some aspects of your healthcare, maybe you want to check on some tests that you've just taken. Maybe it was a blood test. Maybe it was some other kind of test. Maybe it was blood pressure. And you don't have those results in your fingertips. Maybe a doctor didn't share those with you. A great opportunity to see that information is to get onto the portal. And the portal essentially is a website that your provider, your healthcare provider, would offer you, me, you, any one of us, so that we can go into it, identify ourselves, and then we can see that information. And you would think that if I've taken blood tests over the number of years, I could actually see how my blood and its various attributes have changed over time, right? Has my sugar level changed? Has my blood pressure changed? Has various other aspects that are important, has that changed over the years? Well, a portal will be a terrific way to deliver this. But here's where you run the very first problem that involves identity management and this digital identity. You have to declare yourself. You have to tell the portal who you are so that it can connect you as a user to your health information record that the provider may be holding in a digital format in its files, its digital files somewhere in their infrastructure, or maybe it's in the cloud. And as you go to do that, that's the very first thing that many patients find very frustrating. It's a very arduous process, identifying yourself to the portal the first time around, and making sure that you have a clear, a clean and a high trusted identity. And usually what it'll ask you is what's your social security number, what's your driver's number, where have you banked, where have you lived for the last 10 or so years, right? What are all those addresses, have you had a loan, etc. So it goes through this validation process to find out who is Gus Malezis. Let's say I'm the patient, or who is Jim Tate. Let's say you're the patient. And it tends to do this the first time around. And as it does this, it becomes pretty, cumbersome for the patient because, well, they may not remember the exact address where they were 7 years ago, or they may not remember a loan or a credit card that they had 5-7 years ago. They certainly don't have all those records right there in front of them. So that process is pretty, pretty cumbersome and pretty error-prone. And if you don't get everything right in those answers, then you don't get your digital identity, and you can't access the portal. But let's say you go through all of that. And by the way, roughly 15 or 20% go through this and succeed the first time around, right? So that's a pretty small rate, right? Let's say it's 20%. I'll pick the high number. The other 80% of the patients get pretty, unhappy with this. And they say, oh, damn it, I'm just going to call, or I'll just go visit. So that's the first part that you need to think about. What is that digital identity? And by the way, it's different than just your email. All right, your email, maybe it's Jim Malezis at Imprivata. That's not exactly a trusted identity, right? That's what the portal asks you to plug in, but it's not something that has been validated and verified. Another example, very quickly, of a validation is what your bank does with you before they give you a bank account and a checking account, right? They collect a bunch of information, and when they give you your client number, which happens to be your ATM, number as well, usually in most cases, well, that's your digital identity. And from there, they know who you are, and they can directly connect you to all your accounts and all your financial services. So you kind of go through something like this in healthcare, and once you've done that, you're on this portal. And depending on where you are, the portal may ask you for, hey, let me, give me your second factor, right? Your email or your login ID, which could be your email, and your password may not be sufficient, may not be enough to trust that you are who you are, right? And that's when you get what's called a token request. The website asks you to punch in a special number. And that special number is a number that the provider, that your healthcare provider, would email you or would text you via SMS on your phone. So, you now got to, wait for that. You look at your email, you look at your phone, maybe you get an SMS message or some other means of getting it to you. Sometimes it's even mail. Believe it or not, they can mail it to you, but that's, that's about the slowest you can do it. And then you pick up that number. It tends to be a 5, 6, 7-digit number, and then you plug it in. And in doing so, then the system, your healthcare provider system, now has the confidence that you are indeed who you are. Now, note that there are some complications in this process. Let's say you're an elderly patient, and you're not exactly digitally, proficient. And maybe you have a tablet, but you're not great. You might ask your son or your daughter to do this for you. So now your son or your daughter comes in to log in on your behalf, and now you're starting to think about, hey, what are the implications? Are they authorized to access the health information record? And does the provider know that? Does the provider make that allowance? So you get into a series of, complications there, first and foremost being usability. It's just not real simple for most of us. Although the millennials and maybe the Gen Zs, the generations that have grown up with a nice iPhone in their hand, literally glued to their hand, they tend to be more proficient in this, kind of a two-factor or multi-factor token authentication. You still have the problem of who exactly are you and who's validating that you're truly that patient. And if you are not validated, then maybe the wrong person access your healthcare record. They could pretend to be you. They can get drugs and medical services pretending to be you. You could be paying for those things. You could just see how all of that can very quickly become problematic.
Absolutely. Sure.
Right. And by the way, that identity is very crucial because should there be two people somehow using that health identity, then you would have a health record that is not trustworthy. You would have, say, Gus's health record, and let's say I allow, my brother, I don't have one, but let's say I did allow him to use my ID, they can get services on my record, and all of a sudden his ailments and his services and his meds will show up on my record. Really bad idea, right? That is when doctors have real issues in using that and trusting that information.
Well, and that information, even in those cases you're talking about where you're really getting combined data from more than one patient, though they're sharing an identity, you get into clinical trials, and if they're reporting information that's or just somebody goes out there and accesses a lot of data to do some clinical research on data, if it's not truly identity tethered to a specific identity, the outcomes are spurious, to say the least.
That's exactly right.
And so there's a couple different things here. We've talked about identity management for patients. What about for providers? Why is that important? Why does that matter?
Yeah, that's the terrific question. That's the exact other end of the equation. So digital identity and identity management is crucial, hyper crucial for patients. Again, always thinking of that bank analog that I shared a little earlier. You want to be the one accessing your money, not anybody else. On the flip side, in healthcare, there's a provider, there's a caregiver, there's a person who is trained, certified, and entrusted to give you services, and they also need to have a verified high-trust identity. And believe it or not, you would think that, hey, not a problem. They're doctors or nurses. They know this stuff. They understand the severity and the impact of having that trusted identity, part of this identity management system. And yet, very few of them have this. And it's not that they don't want to have it. It is that what exists right now, or I should step back, what has existed right now, up until now, to provide them with a digital identity for the providers, has been has not been designed for them, has not been designed for the provider community. Has been designed for other audiences, generic audiences, just about anybody else that may be in IT. So it doesn't really suit them very well. And I'll give you an example. When a banker, I'll use a bank analogy, when the branch manager, right, that's someone that would be servicing you, goes in to identify themselves, they will, pull up a screen and they'll log in, they'll plug in their username and password, and that identifies them. So now they are. The system allows them to service you as a user, whether you want to take money out, deposit money in, transfer, whatever you want to do. Well, that is something that doesn't seem very onerous, doesn't seem very complicated, except when you get to these passwords that are now very long. We heard about these long passwords, right? They can't be 3 digits or 4 digits. Don't use your birthday. Well, they've been, the banking has gone to these long characters, these long passwords, 12, 14 characters for a long time. It's cumbersome. You forget them if you don't use them that often. Imagine doing this with doctors, where they are staring at a patient that needs their help, and you're forcing them to log into a system. And it's clear that they have to log in, but it's also clear that the patient comes first. The patient is under distress. They need their attention, their help, and yet the system says, wait, you can't help that patient until you deal with me first, which is to doctors and nurses very counterintuitive. It's very problematic. But wait, it gets worse for doctors. For doctors, when they log into a system, unlike you and I and your banker friend, bank manager friend, they log in once. Doctors have to log in literally hundreds of times throughout their shift. So throughout their shift, we've done studies, and we see that they log in literally hundreds of times. They log into the system, that's the machine, then they log into the EHR application, then they log into various applets of the EHR, then they might log into the X-ray application or the imaging application, the scheduling application. They may log into a messaging application that's for healthcare providers. So they will log into dozens of applications just to serve one patient. And that's very problematic because each one of those requires a user ID and password in their world. So they end up burning a ton of time. It's very frustrating. And we've actually done studies with our customers where it shows that every shift, this consumes close to an hour of their time. Imagine this. They're there to work for, 8, 10, 11 hours, right? Usually it's 10 hours, depending where you are. And 10% of their time goes into just trying to get the system to help them or, serve them. So digital identity then and identity management becomes an even more important role for many similar but some slightly different reasons for providers. And what they'd like to be able to do is to say, look, I'm walking around with a badge in my, kind of hanging on my shoulder that is visible. Everybody can see. That's my identity on a physical basis. Use that same thing, right, that same badge as my digital identity. Do what you need to do in the background, figure it out, the technology can do it, and then just use that badge or use my smartphone, right? The smartphone has intelligence. So the right technology that has come around now over the last number of years has really far simplified their world, which then means providers use it, which is a terrific thing because if it complicates the world, they won't use it. They'll find ways around it. And it makes them better, it makes them faster, and it gives them that hour, that 45 minutes, that hour, 15 minutes back.
And so, Gus, that kind of is a good lead into my next question. I think we've identified the issues around identity management, why it's so important, where the gaps are, how in some ways, especially in areas of productivity or interoperability for patients and providers, we can't move forward until this is really dealt with head on. What is Imprivata doing in terms of products or services to address this issue?
Well, Imprivata is in the digital identity management business. We have been dedicated to this area for the last 17-some years. And over the last 5 or 7 years, we've just really delivered an incredibly simplified, very innovative, but highly simplified system for providers. And they are just delighted with being able to just use their badge, as in one example, to access these systems in a very seamless, very transparent, very fast manner. And this is so this is consistent with technology being valuable and invisible. How does technology give them access and their time back without having to learn something new? And that's what Imprivata is focused on. How do we use digital identity technology, apply it specifically in a respectful manner, preserving providers' workflow, which is another word for their processes. And how do we preserve that without getting in their way and without slowing them down? And that's what Imprivata has been dedicated to, and that's where we innovate and lead the market with these solutions and the innovation. But wait, we've gone further than that. On the patient side, we've done very similar work, especially in identifying the patient using, your palm, the veins that are in your palm. And that's a very unique way of doing it. It's very accurate. So when you walk up, put your palm down, and now the system knows, hey, you're Gus Malezis, even if Gus could be misspelled with an S or a Z, or, you could do a bunch of things with his name. But the system now knows you because they have a biometric, and there is no double charting that happens. And better yet, the doctors can now trust this health information record, knowing that, it's only Gus's information has gone in here because I have the confidence. I know only Gus is registered with his palm, and no one else can add information in there. We've also done the same work with medical devices. Now, if you think of medical devices and what the patient room of yesterday was versus today, yesterday the patient room was a couple beds, a bed or two, and we had a couple of simple monitors, maybe an oxygen line, but not a lot of technology in the past. Now you walk into just about any any hospital, and the patient room is chock full of digital equipment. All kinds of monitors, all kinds of vitals machines, all kinds of information capture machines. And the beauty about these machines is that, they're there for the most part, they're pretty silent, but they connect to the network and they connect directly to the patient's health information system. So when a doctor or nurse comes in, first of all, they have to have secure access to it. So they use their badge, again, right, that same badge that's on their shoulder, to access the system that knows, okay, I know who it is. I know it's a accredited individual who may now get information from the machine, and allows them to do that with security and compliance. But furthermore, what these systems will not do is, because they're network connected, they will automatically feed that information into the health information record of the patient, giving nurses even more time back. It used to be the nurse would just literally write on her, on her hand, right, or maybe some notes somewhere, and what's happening at the patient side. Then they go to the nursing station, pull up the record. You hope they pull up the right record, right, and they usually do, and then transcribe that information in the health information record of that patient. Well, that's pretty onerous, right? That's not exactly digital. There's a lot of physicality in that process. So now these machines are network connected, and we're facilitating that digital identity and identity management for those systems, again, giving our providers more time back.
Sure. I appreciate that explanation. That really clarifies it. Unbelievably, Gus, time has flown by. We're just about totally out of time. So let me tell our audience to learn more about the work Imprivata is doing. I guess you can go to imprivata.com. That's imprivata.com. To our audience, thanks for joining me on this episode of the Tate Chronicles. I offer a special salute to my guest, Gus Malezis of Imprivata. Gus, thanks for coming aboard today.
Jim, a great pleasure. Thank you.
You can find more information on this show's program page at healthcarenowradio.com. Until we meet again, here's wishing you smooth sailing and safe harbors.
Tate Chronicles transmission ending now.